Why was the archaeologist depressed? Because their entire career was in ruins. Why are archaeologists so annoying? They always have a bone to pick. If you've watched some of my first series of videos, you've probably figured out that I like old hymns. Well, I've just found out about what may be the oldest Christian hymn in the world. Archaeologists found it in Orynchus, Egypt, and they called it the Orynchus hymn. It was probably written in the latter part of the 3rd century AD. It was written in Greek and included musical annotation. I can't sing Greek, but I did find a recording of it by the Wheaton College Concert Choir. I will play that for you, and while it is playing, I will add the text of one of the many English translations of the lyrics. Archaeology is useful for helping us better understand the times, customs, cultures, and the way people lived during the events described in the Bible. Many artifacts found help confirm things mentioned in the Bible, but none to date have ever disproved anything of what it says in the Bible. That doesn't stop people from trying to use archaeology to cast doubt on the Bible. Most of the time, it takes the form of something archaeologists have not yet found. One of the first attempts to cast doubt on the accuracy of what's written in the Bible that I heard about was that someone tried to say the Bible couldn't be accurate because it often mentions Hittites, but there's no outside evidence that Hittites ever existed. This is what AI generated when I asked who said that. While there wasn't a single definitive statement from a specific individual declaring no evidence for Hittites, several scholars in the 19th and early 20th centuries questioned the historical accuracy of biblical references to them. Notably, Oxford professor Francis William Newman, who lived from 1805 to 1897, expressed doubts about the historical accuracy of biblical Hittites, and archaeologist John Garstang, who lived from 1876 to 1976, noted that some prominent Orientalists in the early 20th century also doubted the existence of the Hittites. The first Hittite ruins were discovered in 1834, but not immediately identified as such until later. Now, archaeologists know the Hittite Empire covered much of what is now Turkey and parts of Syria and Jordan. The next one I heard about was that the Bible could not be trusted because there's no outside evidence that King David ever existed. Here is an AI article generated when asked who first said there's no evidence of King David. The statement that there was no evidence of King David outside the Bible was made by certain scholars, notably those who emphasized the lack of external corroboration for his existence. This sentiment was prevalent before the discovery of the Tel Dan stele, which provided the first archaeological evidence of the house of David and the king of Israel. While skeptics like Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silverstein initially resisted the Tel Dan stele's significance, even they acknowledged its validation of the biblical account of David. The latest I have heard was the Bible can't be true because it associates camels with Abraham, Jacob, Esau, and Joseph. Joseph is believed to have lived somewhere between 2000 and 1500 BC. The earliest camel remains found in Israel to date were from 930 BC, or about 570 years after Joseph probably died. This is just another conclusion drawn on what archaeologists have not found yet. Here is part of an article I found on Wikipedia about camels. When humans first domesticated camels is disputed. Dromedaries, they're the ones with only one hump, may have first been domesticated by humans in Somalia or South Arabia sometime during the 3rd millennium BC. That's between 3000 and 2001 BC. The Bactrian, these are the ones with two humps, in Central Asia around 2500 BC, as at Shar-e-Sukhtay, also known as the Burnt City in Iran. Here is another quote from the same article. In 2009 to 2013, excavations in the Timnah Valley by Lidar Sapirhen and Erez Ben Yosef discovered what may be the earliest domestic camel bones yet found in Israel, or even outside the Arabian Peninsula, dating to around 930 BC. This garnered considerable media coverage, as it is strong evidence that the stories of Abraham, Jacob, Esau, and Joseph were written after this time. The Timnah Valley is located in the extreme south of what is Israel today. There has been active copper mining in that area since 5000 or 6000 BC. The biblical Abraham is traditionally believed to have lived around 2166 to 1883 BC. A period aligning with the Middle Bronze Age in Mesopotamia. Abraham was born in Ur, and sometime later his father moved the whole family to Haran. Ur is located just a little northeast of the Persian Gulf, so it's within 700 to 1100 miles from South Arabia. Their move was about 1,000 years after dromedary camels were first domesticated there. It is also within about 1,200 miles from where Bactrian camels were first domesticated in Shar-e-Sukhtay, Iran, about 500 years before Abraham was born. So it's quite possible they used camels to make their move. After Abraham's father died, Abraham took his wife, his servants, and his nephew Lot and moved to the land of Canaan in an area that today is central Israel. He would have inherited some of his father's camels, would have taken them with him, and become the first to introduce camels to that area. Once they arrived there, they lived in tents like nomads, which would explain why evidence of his camels would be extremely hard for archaeologists to find today. Archaeologists generally find most artifacts by digging in tells. These are mounds of dirt covering the ruins of one or more ancient cities. They also find ruins of ancient cities when someone tries to build in an existing city and uncovers artifacts from an ancient city that once existed on that site. They are rarely able to find artifacts in the open countryside because there are no clues as to where to dig. Genesis 24, verse 10 tells us that Abraham's servant took 10 of his master's camels with him when he went to search for a wife for Isaac. We're not told how many camels Abraham owned, but it was probably more than those 10. Genesis 25, verses 8 and 9, tell us when Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man and full of years, he was gathered to his people. His sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre, in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar the Hittite. It's clear that Ishmael was at Abraham's burial, and probably many or all of Abraham's other sons were there too. It was the custom for all sons to receive a portion of their father's goods as their inheritance, so it is quite likely that Ishmael and Midian both received some of their father's camels. Now we come to the story of Joseph. Genesis 37:25 said, As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. And Genesis 37:28 says, "So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt." At first glance, the verses above may seem to be in conflict, but since Ishmael and Midian were half-brothers, their descendants traveling together would be reasonable, as would the possibility of their riding camels. Since mining in the Timnah Valley had been going on for at least 4,000 years before Abraham came on the scene, those living and working there may have been quite entrenched in their own way of doing things, which would have made them slow to adopt camels as useful for their methods, not to mention that Abraham lived about 200 miles away. As we've seen from the first two examples, just because archaeologists haven't found something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Inorganic artifacts are often dated based on other artifacts found with them. Pottery styles and decoration can help identify cultures and time frames. Coins and ornaments can also help in the same way. Organic artifacts can often be dated by radiocarbon dating techniques. Those techniques have been proven by testing samples with known dates. An example would be a piece of wood taken from inside a tree stump with the date calculated by counting tree rings. I would trust radiocarbon dates back to about 4500 BC, but not later than that. Let me explain why. For many thousands of years, there has been a relatively stable amount of carbon-14 in our environment. Carbon-14 is a radioactive element, which means over time it will decay into something else. Carbon-12 is the regular carbon. It does not change over time. Now, the carbon in our environment typically is about 99% carbon-12 and 1% carbon-14. While plants and animals are growing, they absorb carbon from their environment. So the ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-14 in their bodies would match the environment. When they die, they quit absorbing carbon, so the only change to the ratio is from radioactive decay of carbon-14. The rate of radioactive decay is known for each radioactive element and is constant. That rate is stated as half-life in an amount of time. For example, carbon-14 has a half-life of 5,730 years. That means after 5,730 years, half of the carbon-14 in a sample would have decayed into something else. If it started out at the point of death as 1% of the carbon in the sample, it would only be about 0.5% after 5,730 years. So by measuring the ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-14, one can get a good estimate of how long the source of the sample has been dead. The big assumption is that the ratio in our environment has never changed. I would agree with that to about 4500 BC, but prior to that, I think it was quite different. There are some hints in Scripture. The first hint is in the description of the second day of creation in Genesis 1, verses 6 through 8. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky. And there was evening and there was morning, the second day. I believe the water God put above the sky was a large staple vapor barrier in or above the stratosphere. That would have two effects that I know of. It'd have a greenhouse effect, helping ensure tropical temperatures over the whole Earth. Many paleobotanists agree that at one time, all land surfaces grew plant life consistent with a tropical climate. The second effect would be to block almost all cosmic radiation from penetrating Earth's atmosphere. It is cosmic radiation that creates carbon-14 when it strikes one of the nitrogen atoms in the air. Cosmic rays also cause more rapid aging in people. On average, the men who lived before the flood lived 810 years. Methuselah lived 969 years. That seems to me to be evidence that something was blocking cosmic radiation during those years. After the flood, longevity steadily dropped till God said the average would be 70 to 80 years. That is a 91% drop. Here's a possible explanation. When the Bible describes how the flood occurs, it first says the fountains of the great deep opened. Now, I used to think that meant underground reservoirs of water opened up. I recently watched a documentary titled The Ark and the Darkness. The professors who presented interpreted that to mean there were a large number of volcanic eruptions that would have created huge clouds that could have projected those debris into the stratosphere. That would have upset the balance of the vapor barrier, allowing it to condense around the debris and fall to Earth as rain. Perhaps 40 days and 40 nights of rain. The remaining ash clouds, coupled with the loss of the greenhouse effect of the vapor cloud, would also trigger an ice age. With the vapor barrier gone, cosmic rays could begin penetrating our atmosphere, increasing carbon-14 production, and start to accelerate aging in people. If that is the case, any radiocarbon dates later than 4500 BC should be adjusted downward, since there was significantly less carbon-14 in the environment prior to the flood. If you've heard some of these lies or myth understandings before, I hope this has helped clear things up for you. Jesus, in what is often called his high priestly prayer in John 17:17, said, "Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth." Since Jesus said the Bible is all true, we should believe him, not what other people say.